thought with so much at stake, both of them will have something to say to the caucus. Now then there will be, as I mentioned, a secret ballot. Tellers will be appointed to count, and then after that we will see Chris Hayes come out to this very spot that we've seen him here just a few months ago, and he will be accompanied by Dick Adams with the numbers.
All right, so Chris Hayes will be the man that we see declaring the result if we haven't received a text message before then. Just to clarify though, do both contenders have a chance to make their pitch to the room? Do they get to speak?
They do have a chance to make their pitch, but it's purely up to them whether they want to address the caucus room. There's obviously no time limit on it. We haven't heard from either camp whether that will happen, but they both have the opportunity to do so.
All right, Laura, thanks for that. It's important to know the mechanics of what's about to happen. Richo, I suppose those mechanics haven't changed much over the years. Would you expect that either one of them will actually take the opportunity to say something to the caucus room or just get on with it?
I think the option's there for the Prime Minister to do that. If she chooses to so do, then no doubt Kevin Rudd will respond. That doesn't have to happen. It's just up to her to see what she wants to do. I wanted to, if I just get the opportunity, to disagree with what Paul Murray was saying. I don't think Kevin Rudd's played an especially clever game over the last few months. I think all that's happened is that Julia Gillard has continued to play a really poor game. I mean, this is not one of those situations where you're choosing some spectacular star over some obvious loser. What you're doing here is choosing one bad option over an even worse option. There's no good option for Labor here, and the only good option would have been some way of uniting the party. That's impossible now. That can't happen. But no matter what Paul was saying, I have no doubt that what it does mean is Labor will save some seats. And if it can save 15 seats and not lose 40, it'll do me.
But my simple point, though, was just that, okay, I get that tonight. But what happens when another vote turns up? What happens when Kevin Rudd has to argue in favour of a solution that you know he's not in favour of? Because I reckon what's going to happen now is, if the election is sooner rather than later, it's going to be straight up and down on votes. And Kevin Rudd loses. Bam.
Paul, he's got all sorts of problems on issues like that. But you'd agree that he's the lesser of evils between the two candidates.
Absolutely, but don't underestimate, and look, I'm coming at this from an obvious perspective, but don't underestimate the want that was there with people. Just as it was for Rudd in 2010, they wanted to vote him out. In 2013, they wanted to vote her out. Now, I get it, strategically, if the smart thing to do is to save one or two here and there, that is the best thing for the Labor Party.
There's another factor to that as well, which I think is interesting, which is that the public, it was a minority win rather than a majority win, but they almost bought the late-term removal of Kevin Rudd for Julia Gillard. Will the public see themselves as being treated like mugs to be faced with another late-term change of leader? That's a real risk to his popularity when he's not the incumbent. But I think, nonetheless, where they're at with her, it's just a straight-up lesser of evil.
Oh, absolutely.
But there's no good scenario.
Yeah, but that's the thing. But Richo, in terms of what Kevin Rudd... I mean, Kevin Rudd stood in the very same place that Julia Gillard did in Brisbane, saying that under no circumstances. Well, here he is. He's back. That is his version of there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. That is the grab that we ran down his throat.
Just as you're seeing on screen there, sorry to interrupt, just as you're seeing on screen there, Dick Adams, the Labor MP from Tasmania, has carried in that ballot box, which has had a fair workout over the last 3 or 4 years in the Labor Party.
You've got Anthony Albanese, and is that Stephen Smith next to him?
It is Stephen
Smith.
They
are definitely on opposite sides of this, but they're walking down quite happily, getting along. Maybe the only animosity here is between Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd.
Maybe he's being nice to the next Deputy Prime Minister.
The challenge will be for all of these guys who are going to stay on the ministry, regardless of what happens, and clearly the people like Stephen Smith, Anthony Albanese and the rest, is to try and show some unity. Now, Kevin Rudd, we expect, will win this. And there's Penny Wong walking in with Mark Butler, a factional ally in South Australia, two ministers who have been, well, speculated upon, shall we say.
It's been fascinating, David, hasn't it, how quickly this has moved. I mean, as a throwaway line last night on Showdown, I was there in Canberra with you yesterday, I said that I thought it would start to happen today, but I didn't think it would quite entirely happen today. The expectation was that there might be a bit of a slow burn to this, but, you know, as it turns out, the entire thing has been
come around fairly quickly.
But as Paul Murray says, the phones on tables night, you know, they get a momentum of their own, don't they, Richard?
There was another interesting pairing, Joel Fitzgibbon with Graham Perrott.
Yeah, I saw that.
Now,
I saw that.
Mark Dreyfus, you know, you've got some, not groupings around who they're backing necessarily coming in together.
Can I just say, on a serious point, One of the reasons why Anthony Albanese should be Deputy Prime Minister is he's probably the one unifying senior figure that the Labor Party has. The one person who's been able to talk to both sides and at some stages at least bring them together, at least to make it civil. And so if you want to civilise the conflict,
Wayne Swan's taken an approach of unifying the party?
But hang on, what about Graham?
Wayne Swan, as we mentioned, that Wayne Swan had a big pack with Julia Gillard as well. Let's just watch this as Team Gillard, the Loyalists, who remain, well, certainly before, I can tell you, before Bill Shorten's dramatic comments tonight, remained confident that she would win. She still retains the support of those solid block. You can see Kate Lundy there, Joan Ludwig as well. Who else is in that
There's
pack?
Nicola Roxon, Kate Ellis, Craig Emerson, Brendan O'Connor, Mike Simon,
Andrew Lee.
What's interesting about that is there are two names in there that I think the Rudd camp were expecting, so that's just interesting.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. But look, she's putting on the bravest face she can here, I think, as are the rest of them. But stoic as well, I think, is a fair description, certainly for those who would know what's about to happen. It does look very much like this will be the end of Julia Gillard's leadership and Prime Ministership. Let's just listen as they walk past.
Now, that would be a bridge too far, wouldn't it, Richo, to be walking in that group and then vote against it?
Oh, look, it's been done before.
Here comes Kevin Rudd on his own. Look at the difference
With the
there.
blue tie.
With the blue tie, that's right, and a smile on his face, and a quick pace as he walks into the caucus room solo. We've seen some of his supporters already walking in, but certainly looking fairly upbeat, you have to say, as Kevin Rudd walks in to presumably return to the Labor leadership at this meeting, getting in just before Julia Gillard and her grouping entering the caucus room now. So it's about to get underway. We're about to see the outcome of really years of tension amidst the Labor Party and a personal tension in particular between Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd that hopefully will be resolved one way or another right now.
Yeah, I've got a question for Richo though. People like Graham Perrott, the bloke that we just saw walking in before. Yep. Graham Perrott very publicly said, if Kevin Rudd comes back, I'll resign from the Parliament. He then rescinded that. How can he, as one of these MPs who've gone off and said things about Julia Gillard in the past, said nasty things about Kevin Rudd in the past, stand there, September 14, August 7, November 12, saying, no, he's a good bloke?
I don't think he'll say that. I think what he'll do is say, I'm a member of the Labor Party and I in the end will always support the party in election time.